Now we should look at a team of people in a company that is a bit special. And this is the CEO and the people who are just around the CEO who are not hired, who are not management. So it's the CEO and the board. It's potentially also a mentor, and it's potentially also an advisory board. So these people work together in a special way. But before I get into what surrounds the CEO here, I just want to talk about who is the CEO. There's been a study that shows that 47% of the CEOs in startups were the ones who had the idea. 12% of the CEOs in startups are people who were co-founders but did not have the idea. So typically, it's the one who has the idea who becomes CEO. And you might wonder, so what about the rest? So the rest are people who were not founders, but who becomes CEOs at some point. But you might ask, and I really have a question about this, is the one who had the idea necessarily the best one of the founders to become the first CEO? I think the best one to lead the company is not necessarily the one who got the idea, it's the one who is best at leading people and at selling. Many people will say it's only leading people, but I think when you have a small startup, selling is really important. Even if you do web sales and it's just a website and sells automatically, you still have to sell the idea of working for your company. You still have to sell the idea of investing in the company. So for startups, I think it's very powerful to have somebody with sales skills as the CEO. And maybe people ignore that a little bit too often. At least I have started companies where I think I got the idea. That's how I could recall it. But I didn't want to be the CEO because I wanted one who was much stronger at selling than I was. And there's something to consider about that. That is, if you do big, complex sales, corporate sales, system sales, and you have salespeople, then the salespeople often, they struggle just to close the deal. And what it often takes is to invite the client to a meeting with the CEO, and then the CEO has to close the deal. And then it doesn't work that it's an introvert nerd. It's much better that it's a really good salesman and closer. So for that reason, I think you should always consider to have the best seller at the top of the company. Now let's talk a little bit about the cooperation between the CEO and the board. So first of all, you start with a small board. Small board because then they all feel they have responsibility. Like if you're 1 out of 9 people, everybody assumes somebody else takes responsibility. If you're 3, you really feel that you have to take responsibility. And why do I say not 3 and not 2 or 4? It's because you want an odd number. So if there's a disagreement and there has to be a vote, it's nice because then with 3 there will always be a majority. So the typical thing is you start with 3 and then you move to 5 later on. So when you move to 5, who's that? That would typically be the CEO. Then there will be an independent board member and then 3 board members appointed by investors. That's the typical way to do it. The CEO can ask for a reserved board seat, and a founder can also ask for a reserved board seat. So no matter what happens, the CEO and or the founder has a reserved board seat for themselves. Very often that's the same because the CEO is the founder. So how do the CEO communicate with the board? There are 2 parts to it. There's the formal communication and there's the informal communication. So let me start with the informal because I think that's really important. What can that be? It can be that they have a WhatsApp group where they chat. I really like that because when chatting is when you write about small things, small ideas, small questions. Do you have a contact for this? What should I do here? Have you seen that? Are you aware of that? So on. And in a really good working relationship, that's a fluent thing that happens all the time. Sometimes there are also calls. Sometimes you meet in a bar, in a restaurant for dinner, whatever. But this fluent dialogue is really important. That means that when you have the board meetings, it's not like now they have to get full information about what's going on. No, they know what's going on. And when they know what's going on, they really understand the company. They can also be ambassadors for the company. They can be salespeople for the company. And that also means that the company needs to instill confidence. and it needs to equip them to be ambassadors or salespeople for the company. You want them to go out and find investors for you. You want them to find clients. You want them to find employees. But they can only do that if, first of all, they feel that they really understand and trust the company, and they love the company. So as the CEO and the management have to equip the board members with everything they need to be equipped with to be salesmen, to be ambassadors for the company. Now let's move on to the formal sales board meetings. We can start with how many are there. Typically, you will have at the early stages where the company is zigzagging, making pivots, everything is fluent, everything is in doubt. They have perhaps 8 board meetings a year. What you should do is at the beginning of the year or before the beginning of the year, you suggest 8 dates. And then you get it fixed for the entire year. Because otherwise it will be a nightmare. I've seen sometimes where it has taken 3 months to fix a date for a board meeting because there were too many board members and they were too busy. So much better to fix those meetings way ahead. And it's better to fix too many than too few. So maybe you fix 8 dates and it turns out everything is going smooth and you don't need that many and you cancel a few of them. When the company matures a bit, when you get predictable metrics, when you get better reporting, you can reduce it to 6 board meetings a year. And when you are close to profitability and it's the survival of the company is clearly not in doubt anymore, maybe you go down to 4 formal board meetings a year. But board meetings come in 3 different forms. The first one is the formal board meeting. That's the one where formal decisions are made and minutes are made. It's on the record. But you can also have the informal board meetings that are more discussion meetings. And then you can have, and I think you should often have, 1 board meeting a year without the CEO. And this is where the board members, but not the CEO, discuss whether the CEO is the right one for the job. That you can only discuss when that person is not there. What happens within a board meeting? First of all, I like very much that it's very clear that the CEO is driving the board meeting. I think a good board meeting should be one where it's not so much about the management telling the board what is going on, because they should know that already. First, from this ongoing, continuous dialogue they have. And second, because you have sent out a little board information package, not the night before, never, no, like a week before, you have sent out an information package. It's much better to send out a short one a week before than a more detailed one the night before. I know very often it comes the night before, but that's not professional. A week before they get a package with some information, they have to read up on that. Then they come to the board meeting, then the CEO stands up, perhaps call in some other people from the company and spend 20 minutes just updating what's going on in the company. And then after those 20 minutes, you still have an hour and 40 minutes for discussion. And this is where the CEO says, so here are the things I'd like to ask you about. What do we do about this? What do we do about that? Is there anything we're not doing? Is there anything you see we should be doing that we are not doing? What do you think we are really good at? What do you think we are really bad at? So you get this dialogue. And it's very important that you try to avoid the dynamics where the board act like senior bosses putting the CEO in place. Because a CEO who takes very direct instructions from the board is not a motivated CEO. It's very difficult to drive a startup with all the complexity and all the intuition you need if some of the things you do doesn't come from your heart, but it comes from somebody else. So of course there are situations where the board have to say, this doesn't work. You have to do this different. You have to fire this person, or you have to stop doing this. But it's just worth thinking about that it's not a very good dynamic. The best dynamic is that the CEO raises a question and gets answers from the board. So this was about the CEO and the formal board. So an advisory board are people who have no formal responsibility. the company goes bankrupt and does something really foolish, it's not their responsibility. They only advise about technical and commercial issues. Sometimes advisory boards are used as window dressing. I have to say that it looks good that you have these brilliant names and so on. But they should be used with a real purpose. So you have some kind of recurring relationship with them where you just go through what is happening and they come with some input. It can be in a lunch or dinner format, and it can be in another way. So that can be useful. So in addition to that, CEO board, advisory board, you can also have a mentor and a coach. The difference between a mentor and a coach is that a mentor is a professional guide. It's somebody who has a lot of experience in running, leading organizations, in building up startups or whatever is relevant. And the point of having a mentor when you also got a board and an advisory board is that the mentor is somebody you can have a very personal conversation with, somebody you can maybe ask questions or voice doubts that you don't really want to do with anybody else. A coach is somebody who helps you on personal things. Like, I can't sleep at night, I've got stress. Okay, so if you can't sleep at night, you've got stress. So here's what you have to do. Don't drink coffee after 6 or whatever. So maybe the coach you have is actually not a coach that is particularly related to your job in the company. Maybe you have a fitness trainer or some other coach. Most people don't have a coach, I have to say. Not many have a mentor, but there have been studies of the performance of startups where the CEO has a mentor and where they don't have. And they perform far better when they have the mentor. They also perform far better when the CEO follows blogs from well-known entrepreneurs, scientists, and so on, and listens to their advice. So the coach is a different person, and the coach is something you might have completely outside of your job of running the company. The coach can be somebody who helps you with health, with the balance in life, with how to get family and work to work well together and so on. And so lots of people don't have a coach. I don't have a coach. I have had a few instances in my life, a little bit coaching that was very useful, but it amounts to, I think, 5 hours in my entire life. Other people have a coach and they love it. Mentors tend to be very efficient to have, and it can be more or less formal, but there have been studies that showed that startup companies where the CEO has a mentor perform quite a lot better than startup companies where the CEO does not have a mentor. I cannot, in those two cases, separate cause and effect. Is it that the more clever CEOs have a mentor and follow smart people, or is it the other way around? I don't know, but what I would say is this, that you want to be fluent in what you're doing. So if you go out and talk to investors and you don't know about the new trends, the new terms, you don't know how the words that are commonly used in your sector and so on, it just gives a bad impression. And this is one of the things that really get from working with a mentor and from listening to experts is you become professional, become fluent, you appear adept, and you are adept. And when people talk to you, you understand what they're saying because you have read up on it, or you listen to podcasts and so on. So there you have it. The CEO, the board, the potential advisory board, the potential mentor, the potential coach. It's worthwhile thinking about how do you want to do this. Now you have seen some thoughts. I think it's very important, first and foremost, that the CEO and the board has a great cooperation. What if the board concludes that the CEO has to be replaced? This is a quite important question, because if you look at companies, startup companies that make it to the point where they do an exit as a trade sale or they go public, about half of them have replaced the CEO, and a substantial part of them is actually on their third CEO, and not insignificant part of them is on the fourth CEO. It's pretty tough sometimes to be a CEO on such a company. So what if the board says there's a problem? Well, first of all, the problem might have a very good reason. The reason might be success. So the company has been so successful that it has completely changed its nature. It's no longer a startup. It's a well-established growth company. And the personality you need for being a small startup is not necessarily the personality that works at the later stage. So they fire the CEO because of success. That's great. The first CEO probably made a ton of money on stock options and has a success story on the CV and great memories and good friends and so on. That works fine. But of course, there are also many cases where the CEO was not good enough for the challenge. And that's where you sometimes get problems. When you have the dialogue, it is really good if you can reach some conclusion where the CEO stays connected with the company, either as a board member or as an advisor or as an evangelist or something like that. Both because, especially if it's the founder, you're part of the history, and also because of anybody who has ever worked in a company will forever after be an ambassador or an enemy of the company. So it's better to have a former CEO as still a friend of the company than having that person bad-mouthing and hating the company. So in surprisingly many cases, departing CEOs actually remain connected to the company in some positive way. So the only little warning I have when the CEO remains is a situation where the former CEO remains in the board, which can be fine. But the CEO remains in the board, and when you get a new CEO, the other CEO tries to micromanage the new CEO. That does not work, because when you have a new boss in a company, that new person has to implement his own style or her own style and own strategies with sufficient wiggle room. So that does not work.
Do you speak